So in graphing, you will have something called the x and y intercept. And pretty much what that means is where does it hit on the y-axis, which is your up and down, right? And you can see here it hits at 0, 5 on the y-axis. So this is the y-intercept. And you can see here it hits at negative 2.50. And that's the x-intercept. So by looking at the graph, you could easily find where the x and y intercept is. But let's say you weren't given the graph. How would you then find it? So for y, and this is important, for y intercept, your x coordinate is always 0. So if I were to plug into my original equation a 0 for x, you could easily solve the equation for y. And you should know how to solve equations before getting into graphing. This would get me y equals 5. So when x is 0, y is 5. And that's exactly where the y coordinate is. For the x-intercept, it's the opposite. Your y coordinate is always 0. So if I plugged in a 0 for y, I could solve for x. I would minus 5 to the other side, divide by 2, and I would get x is negative 2.5, which is what we had. We had when x was negative 2.5, y was 0. And so that's how you can find the x and y intercept, by looking at the graph and by not looking at the graph. So by looking at the graph, it's of course easier. The y-intercept here is 0. So remember, for the y-intercept, x is always 0. For x-intercept, y is always 0. So the y here is 5.5 and the x here is negative 7.5. So I could easily find that by looking at the graph. Without looking at the graph, I could easily solve for the x and y-intercept. So remember, for the y-intercept, x is 0. For the x-intercept, y is 0. So for the y-intercept, I'm going to plug in a 0 for x and solve for y in this original equation here. Must make sure I'm good at solving equations in order to do this. So I get 5y equals negative 6. Divide both sides by 5, and so y is negative 6/5. Yes, you can get fractions and decimals and negatives and positives. Okay, now for the x-intercept, if I plug in a 0 for y, I will get 2x equals negative 6. Divide both sides by 2, x is negative 3. So that's how you find your x and y intercept, doing it either way. So good luck with that. Let me know if you have any questions.